Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What would you do with a brain if you had one?
Do? Why, if I had a brain, I could...
Miles per hour.
I could while away.
46, 56 degrees.
Well, it's great to be here. To start off, I will tell you that I also have not yet seen Double Indemnity. And before preparing remarks for tonight, Beth was very careful to tell me that I should not include any spoilers in my presentation. And I thought that the best way to obey her command was to wait and see the movie with all of you. But I will tell you about life insurance and about what double indemnity, of course, means. So in a regular life insurance contract, as you probably know, the owner names a beneficiary, and the owner expects that the beneficiary will collect the death benefit when the insured dies. Double indemnity is a clause in a life insurance contract that says that if the death is caused by an accidental means, then double is paid, which is kind of interesting. So in general, there's some maybe misinformation about what the beneficiary can expect to collect from a life insurance coverage, that all kinds of things could happen, such as suicide during the contestable period. What does that mean? Well, it's all in the fine print of your life insurance contracts, and it says that if the insured dies from suicide, for example, during the first 2 contract years, the death benefit is not paid. Maybe return of premium would be paid. Also, any death during the first 2 years of issuing the contract is during what's called the contestable period. And the life insurer can investigate and perhaps negate the contract due to misinformation or misrepresentation. So any death that occurs within 2 years of contract issue is investigated, usually by a third-party investigator. Other things that might lead the death benefit to not be paid as expected might be, misstatement of age or gender in the contract. Usually some death benefit would be paid when that's discovered, when the death certificate is examined. But if you lie on your application and you say that you're 25, when in fact you're 45, the death benefit would be adjusted appropriately before it's just paid out. So the lesson here is, you don't want to try to fool the life insurance company. And also, the other thing to remember is that there's some things called exclusion riders. So if, for example, you pilot small planes for your hobby, and you apply for life insurance, you might be issued life insurance with what's called an exclusion rider, saying that if your death occurs while you're piloting a small plane, the benefit will not be paid. Also, if at any time your contract is found that you'd fraudulently entered into the contract, again, like any contract, it's completely negated and no death benefit will be paid. So if you had your brother-in-law sign as your physician, and he's really a plumber and not a physician at all, that attending physician statement would be considered fraudulent and the entire contract would be negated. And this, of course, would be completely unknown to the owner because the benefit would only be paid on the insured's death or not be paid. Back to double indemnity for a second. So double indemnity, although perhaps in this movie it's a clause in a life insurance contract, certainly for the past 40 years I've never seen a clause called double indemnity. What's sold now that does the same trick is an accidental death and dismemberment rider. So as a rider, it's a very inexpensive kind of coverage that's added, and you buy a life insurance contract with $1 million face amount, and you'd say, well, if the death is accidental, I'll get $2 million. Now, that's a very, this whole product is suspect from both sides. So from the on the life insurance industry, if the correct financial underwriting has been done, if the beneficiary needs $1 million, if the death is from natural causes, why would they need $2 million if the death occurs due to an accident? In fact, logic would point the other way, that usually there's financial stress when the insured has gone through a long illness, needing lots of assistance with daily living and medical care. And usually there's much less financial stress when the death is caused by accident. So there's suspicion to begin with as to why one would go out of their way to add an accidental death benefit. On the other hand, there's suspicion on the life insurance company side. It's a very narrow definition of death by accident. And there's a lot of legal disputes about what was the actual cause of death. So if an accident occurred, as in fact there was one recently reported in the news, and surgery was needed to fix something that was broken in the accident, and then death occurred due to infection in the surgery, that would not be considered an accidental death with a double payout from the life insurer's perspective. So there's also a question of when the death occurred. If you had an injury, most contracts have 6 months as a limit. So if you die from your injuries 6 months plus 1 day after the incident, again, that double benefit would not be paid. So the whole product is fraught with some problems. There is one, I just would be remiss to not mention the one instance when accidental death coverage would be justifiable and not just gambling, let me put it that, not just taking a risk and gambling, is if an applicant was uninsurable for some reason, uninsurable because of a dread disease or a severe medical condition, and they just wanted some coverage for their family, then in that case, a standalone accidental death benefit product would at least give some coverage. Still, it's pretty speculative. Okay, well, with that background, the question is, why are we here? Why are actuarial scientists here? How do we influence this product development, product pricing? And for that, my colleague, Hal Tepfer, will now address you.
Thank you, Lois. I have seen the movie. Let me tell you how it ends. So Lois has already mentioned that the film tonight is Double Indemnity, and has already mentioned what it means in terms of words, that if double indemnity exists, accidental death doubles the benefit. But I know why many of you are here. You're saying to yourselves, could you explain this as complicated as possible in math terms? And you're in luck. Because to an actuarial scientist, I'm serious, this is double indemnity. Okay, I know what you're thinking, but the D, of course, means natural death, and the A is the accidental death. So anyway, double indemnity for actuaries means that. So what about actuaries? What is it that we do? How is it that we do what we do, and so forth? I would venture to guess that everybody in this room has some form of insurance. Life insurance, medical, homeowners, automobile insurance, even when you get something with a lifetime warranty. An actuary should have been involved in the calculation of what it is that you're paying for that product. So actuaries are kind of everywhere. We just kind of keep to ourselves, which is why you don't see us out there very much. So here's what I'm going to do. Some simple math. I'm going to assume, and I could be wrong, the lights are in my eyes, that this theater seats like 440 people. And I had to park earlier. And so in doing so, here's the assumption I'm going to make, that 5% of you over the next year are going to have an accident of $10,000. I think it was the Toyota, by the way, but we'll get back to that. 15% of you are going to have an accident of $1,000. And the rest of us, all of us who think we're excellent drivers, aren't going to have an accident at all. And so a simple actuarial question that an actuary answers is, what is it, ignoring things like expenses and profits and things like that, what is it that you should pay for your insurance? Very simple math. 5% of the people have 10,000, 15% have 1,000, 80% have nothing. An actuary would tell you that the total that everybody in this audience should pay for their insurance is therefore $650. I understand that that's not how insurance really works, so please don't quote me on that, but I just want to kind of give you a flavor of how we do it. And imagine if we took this and expanded it to other worlds like medical insurance and life insurance. You'll see how it works. But let's take this apart for just a bit. Let's pull these pieces apart for just a moment, and let's say, where do these numbers come from? Okay, yes, I made them up, but let's pretend that I'm really doing this, right? Where did the numbers come from? Who came up with those percentages? Well, it was probably an actuary who used information about the group, right? Took a look at what had happened historically. Said, I know people that come to the Coolidge corner and most of them are good drivers, but I've seen some things out in the parking lot that would... So I think it's fair, right? That 5% of the people are going to have high risk, be high risk people. But what about the other numbers? Who came up with those numbers? The 10, the 1, and the 0. Well, actually, this is the real role of the actuary. Because the actuary uses all kinds of stuff. For those who can't read the words, it says all kinds of stuff. The actuary uses all kinds of stuff to determine what we think is going to happen in the future. Yes, it's good to know that 5% of the people in the room are going to have an accident, but how big is that accident going to be? It's good to know that 10% of the people are going to have medical expenses, but what are those medical expenses going to be? So what we do as actuaries is there's a lot of data work involved. There's a lot of assumptions made. There's a lot of analysis of the data that we have available to us. So, like I said, various kinds of insurance, medical, life, auto, homeowners, long-term care, pension, actuaries are involved with it. So I guess what I want to leave you with in the kind of broad view is that what we do as actuaries is more than just the math part. And so I know we're in a movie theater, so I thought I could maybe illustrate this a little bit better with something to show you what an actuary really does. So this is actuarial science. This blender is actuarial science. In fact, you could buy this right now at Target with the words actuarial science on it. So the blender is kind of what we are using, and we're putting into that our knowledge, data, our experience, our tools, and all that. But of course, nothing works until you bring the actuary along. Here he comes. And we mix it all up, and we end up with, please, this took me like 8 weeks. And we end up with the insurance. We take all of these skills that we have as data analysts, as people who can make assumptions, as mathematicians, and we put it all together like this. But one of the things, so that's like a general idea of what actuaries do. But I think one of the things that a lot of people associate actuaries with is life insurance, which is fair. And life insurance means that we can't just say people are going to have an accident of $10,000. We say things like, what are the chances that somebody's going to die over a certain period? And that comes into life expectancy. Because as actuaries, if you meet an actuary at a cocktail party, I'm serious, right? This is what everybody says to me. Do you know what I'm going to lie? And I say, yes, of course, I do. But they ask me, no spoilers. So we have these things called mortality tables. We have these things called mortality tables that we use to analyze mortality. I just like to explain what I'm doing, but nothing up here is all that important. But here's what is important. From an actuarial standpoint, how long is somebody expected to live? Across the bottom, I started at age 60 just to kind of make a point, but you can see that a 65-year-old male today is expected to live 21 years, whereas a 95-year-old male is expected to live 3.4 years. 65-year-old female, 23, 95-year-old female, 3.9. We don't use those numbers directly, but it's really important when we do calculations. And this seems like a kind of an intelligent group, and you're saying to yourselves, I'm not 65, I'm not 85. When am I going to live until? Well, you're in luck. This is a list of all of these are all probabilities though, right? The fact that I have a 60-year-old female in the upper left living for 27 years, All that means is that from an actuarial standpoint, half of all 60-year-old women will die before 27.4 years from now, and half will die after that. That's what you're looking at here. You can see that the numbers kind of decline as we move from upper left to lower right. I'll give you a minute to find your own age. But another question that we're asked is, what are my chances of dying in the next year? And again, here's something that I find when I do this lecture for students. I always find that it's something that surprises them as well, which is that if we're looking at the probability of dying, here's the probability a woman dies in the next year starting at age 50. Notice it never gets above 30%. A man, again, just barely above 30%. So there's less than a 50% chance of dying up until the time you get to age 100 based on the actuarial tables. And an important thing about actuarial science is, if you want to live until age 93, live until age 92. Because your chances are amazing of making it one more year. Now, we also think, if you read the news, we also think there's mortality improvement coming, so any of the numbers that I showed you should be enhanced over time. Pension plans will become more expensive, insurance will become a little bit less expensive. I'm going to turn it back over to Lois just for a minute so she can talk about a couple of things, and then we'll wrap up. Lois?
Right. Well, since again, the name of the movie, Double Indemnity, has us believing it's something about accidental deaths are going to be demonstrated. So this graph is trying to show a comparison of accidental death benefit rates to standard mortality rates. This actually doesn't demonstrate it very well because the accidental death rates are so small. They're the orange and black lines along the bottom. What we can see is that basically from age 0 to age 35, all deaths are accidental deaths. Almost all deaths are accidental deaths. We don't expect young people to be dying from disease. But this chart doesn't show it well. It does rise after age 50, and we do get less and less accidental deaths as a percentage of total mortality. So it's very small. That's why it's a very, very inexpensive product. This is showing accidental death benefits, the difference between male and female. And what we see is that the male accidental death benefit rates are 2 to 3 times the female rates at almost all ages up to about 70. So it's much more likely that a male will die from an accidental death than a female. And again, we see very low rates in general. And just when they start to accidental death benefit rates start to accelerate around age 65, typically that's where the coverage terminates. So if you read either your group insurance contract where that's a benefit, or a rider that you attach to your life insurance contract, the accidental death benefits will cease at age 65, perhaps age 70. So that's how the product is kept, quite cheap. It trends over time. I can just tell you that this study from 1996 looked at the prior 50 years of data, and accidental death basically improved tremendously, which is why the Society of Actuaries came out with a new table in '96, that there's been great improvements in accidental deaths. And the reason that the influences have to do with safer automobiles, since still automobile crashes are a large portion of the accidental deaths, so the improvement in the safety. And the other thing is improvements in workplace accidents by safety, OSHA standards and safety implemented in the workplace, because workplace accidents are also a tremendous influence on the accidental death rates. And that's the reason why the male rates are higher than the female rates of accidental death, because women are less likely to be firefighters, policemen, coal miners, and engaged in those dangerous occupations. So if you see a death at age 30 or 25 and it's an accidental death, you wouldn't question it. But if you saw a death at age 60 and it was an accidental death, it's going to be rare. You're going to say, maybe it wasn't an accident. All right, and now back to Hal.
Okay, so So thank you for sitting. Thank you for sitting for the meal that is the actuarial part of the evening. Let's move on to the dessert part. So I know it's surprising, but there have been actuaries in films, and what I'm serious. Yeah, and I'm gonna give them a rating because we're actuaries, anywhere between 1 and 5 calculators. All right? Yeah. So there is no. I know we're not supposed to give anything away. There is no actuary in this film. Anybody who wants to leave now, you're welcome to. But here are some movies with actuaries. The musical comedy, Are You With It?, starring Donald O'Connor, who misplaces a decimal point. Mayhem ensues, but there's not a lot of actuarial math, so I give it 1.5 calculators. About Schmidt. Now, you do know this one, right? About Schmidt, yeah, the Jack Nicholson movie. All right, I'm looking at it from an actuarial perspective, so my rating might be different than yours. Jack Nicholson, an actuary who's about to retire, goes in search of the meaning of life. Mayhem again ensues. It's a good view of what an actuary's office looks like, if you remember those scenes, but otherwise, 2 calculators for this one. Boyhood, another... Forget how great the movie is, actuarial only. You may or may not remember that Ethan Hawke's character does talk about taking an actuarial exam and that he's going to work at an insurance company. We follow his son through the movie. Periodically, there's mayhem, but not much actuarial stuff, so we'll give it 1 calculator. Stranger Than Fiction. Now, there's not an actuary in it directly, but Will Ferrell's character is an auditor who says his girlfriend got stolen by an actuary, which, 3 calculators, eh? Yeah, thank you. The actuarial profession thanks you. A couple of movies have people in it that could be actuaries, but it's really hard to tell. Zootopia has a jaguar. Sweet Charity, John McMartin's character, Ben Stiller's character in Along Came Polly, Edward Norton's character in Fight Club. None of them are called actuaries, but many of them deal with risk. But the grand finale, there is one movie that, in my opinion, is the best movie with an actuary in it. Now, here's why it's the best. The actuarial character has a key role in it. The actuarial character is clearly identified, and the actuarial character dies heroically. And that movie, of course, 5 calculators, is the movie Tron. From 1982, not the sequel, not the remake, the 1982. And for those who don't remember, here's our actuary, right there. That's Ram. He says, I was an actuarial program and worked for a big insurance company. So there you go, actuaries in film. That's it. Thank you very much for listening to us. Enjoy the film.